brewery in Chicago, Illinois. This is a twofer for me this year. This is my second beer school, which I'm pretty proud about. It's my third one overall. I did one previously with Boulevard, so I don't know what I get for being the first person to do three. I don't know if maybe I get a beer on the house tonight or something like that. So yeah, it's a fun time. I always enjoy it. It's cool. It's fun to come talk to like-minded people about something that you're all passionate about. In this case, it's beer, which is pretty easy to get passionate about. I'll tell you a little bit about how, first maybe off how I got into beer. Pretty early on, I knew that for the rest of my life, I was going to drink beer. And so I figured I'd get to know it really well, I figured I've since then done the same thing with, coffee and bread and food and other vices. Yeah, I started freelance writing about beer when I was a journalist, which is my trade out of college, and slowly morphed my way into like a sales and marketing dude for beer. And the cool thing about craft beer, the craft beer movement nowadays, is that I think most of the people, even if they're not a hands-on, day-to-day, brewing the beer employee, anybody that's working in this industry is in it for very correct, right reasons, which is this is a really neat movement, really, that we're involved in here in the United States towards small family-owned businesses that are making a product that had kind of been forgotten in the United States for a long, long, ugly post-prohibition period of time, right? And we're now in this beautiful renaissance. Y'all in St. Louis have a pretty excellent standpoint of that, I think, maybe more so than most cities. So it's awesome. It's great to see you all out here supporting small breweries, not just us, but whoever else you drink tonight. And then, yeah, you get free beer, which explains why this room is full all the time as well. But you're doing it for the right reasons, which I love. And you look like a beautiful group, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun and a couple laughs. So definitely, ask questions, do whatever. I know I'm supposed to have some questions for you at the end. We'll give away some glassware, so try to listen a little bit. And you want to call me out on something, feel free. Any and all. It'll be good fun. So yeah, I got into beer about 5 years ago. I worked for a small brewery over in Kansas City, which is where I live, called Boulevard Brewing Company. Maybe you've heard of them, for a couple of years, and that's where I did my first beer school. And I've since actually come back to TwoBrothers. TwoBrothers was the first brewery I ever worked for when I was a young kid. They paid me in beer and gave me a cell phone and some business cards and said, go get them, Tiger. And this was about 8 years ago. So I was hitting the streets of Chicago and getting people excited about, non-big corporate beer. And I've since come back to TwoBrothers, the TwoBrothers family, and we're opening up Midwestern states. And Missouri was one of the first ones we did, and we did that about a year ago, roughly. So those hands that hadn't had any of our beer yet will be, excited to remedy that tonight and keep an eye out for us throughout Missouri for sure. So that's me in a nutshell. I'll talk a little bit in depth about TwoBrothers, what they're all about. TwoBrothers is a brewery that was founded by, believe it or not, Two Brothers, you got it. Jim and Jason Abel, E-B-E-L, that's their last name. Founded the brewery back in '97. And, it's a similar startup story. I think of a lot of cool, small craft breweries at that time / in general. Jim and Jason both graduated from the University of Illinois, went and traveled around Europe a little bit, did like some, kind of classic post-collegiate Euro backpacking stuff, and over there fell in love with good beer. And at the time, even in the mid-'90s, in Chicagoland area, good beer, small breweries were hard to find. And so they came back to the United States. Jim started his career as a lawyer. Jason started his career as an architect. And they eventually left those lucrative, wonderful careers to their family's chagrin and started up a home brewing supply shop. That's how they got up and running right off the bat. I don't know if there's any home brewers in the house, but back in the mid-'90s, getting your hands on home brewing supplies was also kind of a tricky thing to do. Jimmy Carter had legalized home brewing, I think, just about a decade prior, a little over. So that's how they got up and running. They just wanted to make their own beer, figured they'd start up a little shop and start selling ingredients. And that has morphed into, today, I'll take a big leap ahead, what is, one of the second largest independently owned brewery in the state of Illinois. So we're pretty proud of that. We've been around for 18 years now. That's a good one. It's not mine. Whose was it? Raise your hand. Come on. Nobody's going to raise their hand? Okay. So yeah, that's where we are today. Cool stories along the way. You know, we started off as a draft-only operation, as a lot of small breweries do. You know, selling beer out of the back of a Honda Civic. I mean, you hear these stories a lot with small startup breweries, but hearing it a lot doesn't make it any less, I think, cool and impactful, really, in a lot of ways. They started off, a couple of their first original fermentation tanks came from Jim and Jason's grandfather, who owned a dairy farm. And stainless steel is stainless steel. There's a lot of breweries that have that same story, too, have utilized old school cheese making and dairy equipment as fermentation tanks. So they've eventually scrapped those. I think it was just about maybe 10 years that they finally scrapped those tanks. But it's neat to see kind of humble beginnings turn into something really, really neat. Today we employ, almost 100 people throughout 2 brew pubs in Chicago, production facility, and we actually have a small satellite brewery down in Arizona, of all places. The brothers have some family ties down there and have opened up a little pilot brew pub. And so, yeah, we're poised to make about 50,000 barrels of beer this year, which is a nice, healthy kind of clip of beer. I think that's a fun time for small breweries. You're not so big that you've lost a little bit of control, maybe in certain ways, but you're big enough to where you're kind of like a grown-up. And, you know, we've got a full-blown lab department that's doing quality control, quality assurance on all of our beer. Day in and day out, and so your consistency gets incredibly night and day better versus maybe that startup brewery that isn't quite there, which is totally fine. But it's we're at a really kind of fun growth stage for our brewery, and that's really why we started selling our beer down here in your fine state, because we had a little bit of beer to play around with. We were pretty confident that beer is in tip-top shape and was going to stay that way, and so that's why we started selling our beer down here. We've got about 7 year-round styles of beer. Tonight we're going to try 1 year-round style of beer and a couple of fun seasonals. We've really just gotten to the point of starting to dabble here in Missouri with a little bit of our small batch stuff. We've got one of a pretty robust sour beer program going on right now. Over the course of the last couple of years, we started buying oak foeders. I think foeders is the American way of pronouncing it. If anybody knows French, you can correct me. Foudres, which are what winemakers use, right, to age beer. It's just massive oak barrels, essentially. And so we've started doing a lot of really fun sour project stuff that we're excited about. We won a GABF gold medal. I'll mention some gold medal, GABF medal stuff. You can take it all with a grain of salt. Medals are medals, but we won a GABF gold last year in the American Wild Oak-Aged category. And for anybody that digs on sour beer, that's a pretty stocked category of beer with the likes of Lost Abbeys and Allagashes and Cascades of the world. And so we took home a gold for a sour beer, a really small batch sour beer we'd done there. So we're in the process of starting to filter a lot of that stuff down here to Missouri. So I think in 2016, for sure, keep an eye out for some funky stuff coming from us, which we're excited about. This first year in business down here, we've kind of been focusing a little bit more on our traditional core year-round beers and some fun kind of annual seasonals and stuff like that. But yeah, fun stuff along the way. Yes, please. That's a good question. Yeah, no, Warrenville, Illinois, which is essentially just north of Naperville. It's 20 miles west of downtown is where our production facility is. We've got a little brew pub there. And we recently purchased a historic roundhouse, right, where trains used to come in and they'd get flipped around so they could come back out. Roundhouse? That was a new term for me. We purchased a really cool old building there and put in a pilot brewing system and a bakery and a coffee roaster, actually, and a bunch of other fun stuff. Maybe that's the only other thing I'll mention briefly about our origin is that when Jim and Jason started selling our beer, not in the back of their Honda Civics, they started, actually had to start up a small distribution company, essentially, to sell their beer, because none of the big guys wanted to to touch a small brewery like that. That distribution company went on to bring to the Midwest Lagunitas, Stone, Allagash, Lost Abbey, Left Hand. They've got really one of the biggest, most robust portfolios of craft beer in Chicago. So I think the cool thing about the craft beer movement is it's still this rising tides raises all ship sort of mentality. You know, we've still got a long way to go with getting craft beer into everybody's hands, not just you enlightened, wonderful people. And so they played a neat role, Jim and Jason played a neat role in not just kind of bringing our beer to people in Chicago, but like introducing all of these awesome, now national, big, just killer breweries. We've since sold that distribution company and kind of doubled down and refocused everything on the brewery, which is also a nice place to be. But that's a pretty cool little side note as well. Does everybody have beer? I need to wait till I have a beer in my hand before I start talking. Does everybody have a beer? Yeah? All right, I'll stop jibber-jabbing. We'll actually drink some beer. How about that? Okay, so we're on to our first beer of the evening. This is a beer we've made for quite a few summers in a row now. It's called Days Dortmunder Lager. Has anybody had a Dortmunder Lager before? Couple? All right. Dab comes to mind as a classic import. What? Great Lakes. Okay, so that was going to be the American one I bring up for sure. Thank you very much. Lovely. So I think really here in Missouri too, Dortmunder Lager is a style of beer we don't see a lot, and we don't see it almost primarily because Great Lakes, which is a brewery up in Cleveland, who makes a wonderful Dortmunder Lager, doesn't sell their beer down here, and they're one of, along with us, the very few American breweries that have made this style of beer. So I think it's a really fun, kind of unique style you don't see a lot, and we were thrilled. It's been a great summer with it. We've really been killing it here. So the origins of a Dortmunder Lager. We're going to talk history a lot, for better or worse, because we've got a lot of historic styles and things to bring up in that nature with the beers we're having tonight. Dortmunder Lager is a fun, kind of a fun history on it. There's historically speaking this very industrial region of Germany, RUHR version area of Germany that was primarily built on coal mines, and it was just blue collar working part of Germany for sure. So while the rest of Germany are more more of the industrialized cities in Germany were enjoying really soft, delicate pilsners, or maybe a nice Helles or something like that. This particular region built this style of beer, the Dortmunder Lager, Dortmunder Export, and it's kind of like a pilsner with teeth a little bit. It's like had a little bit of coal dust in there. We don't brew the beer with any coal dust. I don't mean to say that, but that's where the style of this beer really originates from. Is from a kind of blue collar beginnings. So Dortmund is the largest city in this Ruhr district in Germany, and like a lot of origins of beer, right? The beer itself is a product of its environment, just like wine, just like terrier or terroir. I like to call it terrier. It's beer is a sense of its place and where it's made, and so water being 99% of beer, water plays a pretty key role, right? And that's been the same way all throughout the history of man and beer, and it's no different with a Dortmunder Lager. The water in Dortmund was particularly high in a lot of different mineral contents, a lot of phosphorus, I have some cheat sheets here, calcium chloride, so just particularly more minerally, which is similar to how pale ales came to be. Pale ales originated from this part of England called Burton-on-Trent, and they also had very minerally water. And people found at some point that minerally water impart a neat minerally flavor in beer, but that minerality also kind of lets hops shine a little bit. It lets the bittering agent in hops, bittering agent in beer, right? Hops shine through a little bit more. And so I think we see a lot of that here as well. So the style is Pilsner-esque. I think you definitely get some sulfur on it in a good way. Sulfur can be an off profile on beer sometimes, but in this particular nature, it's a byproduct of the water quality, and I think that sulfury minerality is really, I think, delightful. I do think you get a little bit more hop profile on the end than maybe you do a traditional Czech or a Bohemian Pilsner. And I think that sulfury content just kind of finishes the beer a little more sharp as well than maybe a lingering sort of presence you can get with traditional German Pils. We do have to take the water we have in Warrenville, Illinois is delightful brewing water. It's also pretty, naturally speaking, kind of a little higher in mineral content than Chicago drinking water, which we're not on. We're on our own, separate water source. So we're in a good place to brew this style of beer. We do have to add a little bit of calcium chloride and a little bit of phosphoric acid into our water source to get this water to a decent, historic replicate of where it would be if we were brewing beer in Dortmund, Germany in the 1700s. So it's kind of a fun thing to think about too. And yeah, please.
The smell made me think of apple juice.
Interesting. Let me. Apple juice. I don't get apple juice, but again, we're all here drinking beer, man. So, did you have apple juice before you came here tonight? I thought you might have some on your beard or something like that. Okay. No, I don't get any apple. I don't get any apple juice. I mean, once again, I do think, I do think the nose on it is significantly different from, your traditional Pilsner. And for me, that maybe even a sense of fruitiness you're getting or whatnot, I think could be what I'm describing as more mineral content or something along those lines. Do you have a question? That's an excellent question that I don't have a full answer on. I don't think there's, we're testing the water when it comes out of, it's more so testing water when it comes out of our pipes, so to speak, which we do before every brewing process, essentially, because every brewery is going to be manipulating their water source one way or another through filtration of some kind before they go into brewing process. So we're doing it every time. Every brewery also has a decent relationship with their water provider. It's a little different than your $60 a month water bill that you get in the mail. We're using a lot of water. So, but yeah, the testing process is happening all the time. I mean, breweries go crazy with water filtration. They will they'll completely filter the water that they're using to hose off the outside of tanks, just because they just want the purest possible water that they possibly can get. So yeah, every brewery is manipulating pH levels essentially of the water prior to it going into the brewing process. In this particular case, we're just essentially dumping more of the mineral content that the water provider has stripped out because we want it back in there, if that makes more sense.
Sort of the opposite of last week. We had Sunward last week.
Yeah.
They're kind of the opposite. They make it absolutely perfectly clean before they do anything, and they really don't do anything but make it clean.
Yeah.
Because all they do is super clean lagers. That's all that they do. So.
Which makes a lot of sense. You want to start off with the baseline every time, and especially if you're building lagers, which Sudworks makes amazing lagers. And I suppose I'll talk about that a little bit too. This is, we only do, we do, on any year, mixing in some small batch stuff, we maybe do 3 lagers a year, right? Ales and lagers being the 2 overarching categories of beer. Lagers taking significantly longer to ferment than ales. For a small brewery, lagers are referred to as, tank hogs. They're tying up your precious fermentation tanks for 5 more weeks, 6 more weeks than your normal year-round ale offerings might. So for that particular reason and the size we're at, we do a seasonal dog days, we do a fall Oktoberfest beer, but for exactly that reason, we lean a little bit more on the ale side of things. That said, I think lagers are super fun. I think we're starting to see a resurgence of lagers being brewed by small craft breweries, whereas we're going to have a double IPA here in a little bit, and we're going to have an Imperial Stout and I love those beers, and I like to have a beer that punches me in the face and I can't taste anything after it, and then I have 2 more of them, and you know, I love that. Don't get me wrong, but I think as a people, as an enlightened beer people, we're also moving back towards this idea of like, you know what, it would be kind of nice to have a couple of dog days, a couple of Dortmunder lagers, and think about it a little bit, but not have to get crazy deep thinking into it. And be able to have 3 of them and still have my wits about me, and still be able to taste that next beer, or taste what I'm going to eat, and everything like that. And so I think it's cool that we're starting to see, you know, a lot more craft breweries going back to this. Yes, please. It's a just a little over 5%, 5.1, 17 IBUs. So it's all, yeah, obviously low. Sorry? 27. Huh. I'd say 17. But yeah. We write it down. I don't know. We miswrite it down often, I think, on our cans versus our selling sheets versus our other things. So you're looking at roughly 5%, and yeah, somewhere around that 20%, 20 IBU level. I don't think you're obviously not. I think any IBU level on a lager is, you know, to a certain degree, kind of, it is what it is. We talk about noble hops in this beer, right? Meaning European hops, kind of old world hops, if you will, versus the hops grown in the Pacific Northwest that we'll taste a lot more of here in this next beer. And so I think the cool part about this beer is that the hop profile does also speak more to a place, essentially. Those noble hops carry with them much more kind of earthy, sharp, crisp, clean sort of characteristics. And you know, as an American craft beer geek, you know, I like my citrusy grapefruit hop bomb as much as the next person, and that's what we'll have next. But it's kind of refreshing to have you know, something that's made using hops that people 300 years ago were using the same essential varietal of hop, which is kind of cool. The other thing I'll mention quickly about, lagers, the other reason I think craft breweries were probably slow to get on the bandwagon of making beers like this is 2 reasons. One, you're competing with the king of beers, right? I mean, like, why would you get into that category and try to play around there? But I think there's again this neat resurgence of like, no, this is history. I mean, this is the way beer was made originally, you know. So when done right, this style of beer can be very complex and interesting. So I think that's part of the reason that there was a holdup. But the other is that, you know, there's nothing to hide on this beer. A big double IPA, you can mask some issues with water filtration or fermentation temperature or any number of things if you've got 100 IBUs that's you know, pleasantly blowing your taste buds out of the water. So the nice part I think about craft breweries, this resurgence of lagers, is that it's showing that craft breweries are getting much better at what they're doing as well, because these beers are clean. I mean, the Sudworks beers are clean, you know, and I say clean meaning you're not picking anything out that wasn't intended to be there, and it's pretty darn easy to pick those things out on a little bit more of a blank canvas, if you will, like a Dortmunder lager. This beer won a GABF gold, bronze medal in 2011, which is high praise. You were talking about Great Lakes, and their beer is called Great Lakes Dortmunder Gold. Dortmunder Gold for a reason that is kind of this benchmark in the United States of this particular style of beer. So to get a medal in that category, yeah, is pretty cool. Any questions? What do you guys think? It's a good palate primer. It's a good lawnmower beer. It's a good beer with any sort of food because it just goes with everything. And it's a good beer to wake your taste buds up and say, oh yeah, we're drinking beer. And now we'll go on to different other, not more flavorful, but differently flavored beers. Thank you very much. All right. Yeah, that smells pretty. We'll go on to our next beer here. So this is year-round beer for us, we started making last year. It's called Wobble IPA. You might have heard of the glassware, the wobbles. Our marketing, yeah, we're clever, we're super clever. We make a number of IPAs. You're going to taste our double IPA tonight, which is a once-a-year release. We do a fresh hopped beer using hops that are overnighted to us during hop harvest season, which we are in the midst of right now. That beer is called Heavy Handed. You'll start to see that in kegs and six-packs at the end of the month, actually. So that's an IPA we've always made. We make a beer called Outlaw IPA, which is a little bit more of like I'd say a little bit more of like a malt-driven IPA, meaning it's got like a nice caramelly, sweet backbone to it, along with a pretty progressive hop profile. But we'd never done what I would consider a little bit more of just like an unabashed West Coast influenced IPA. West Coast influence meaning, you can tell by looking at it, the beer is, there's malt in there, clearly. We've got our base malt and a little bit of crystal malt, but we've built this beer so that hops are on display. And that's because the crazy amount of people who love IPAs, myself included right now, drink IPAs because they want hops on display. So, I mean, our Outlaw, our malt-driven beer, is delightful and wonderful, but this is really to give us hopheads what we want, right? We want just a nice, like, really prominent hop profile. So this is Wobble IPA, and we launched it end of last year. IPAs are the fastest growing segment of beer in the United States and have been for a long time, which, if your first instinct when you drink an IPA is to pucker up your face like the bitter beer face guy from the Keystone ad campaigns from when I was a child, then, you'd probably be like, you're full of crap. IPAs, but despite the fact that bittering quality is one of the most off-putting things in beer for maybe craft beer novices or those just getting into craft beer, it's also got, I think, this just contagious, effect that people have fallen in love with, and this has become the calling card of the American craft beer movement, which is kind of cool. So in a world that has a billion awesome IPAs, we thought we would make another awesome IPA and throw it out into the world, and it's been extremely well received because it's excellent and because you all can't get enough IPAs. Like, nobody can get enough of them. So it's a 4-hop IPA. I will read off said hops: Simcoe, Centennial, Citra, and Chinook. The last two, all four are in the boil, so all four are imparting bitterness into the beer. The last two are also then imparted into a dry hopping regimen, which is when hops are floated on top of the beer to give it aroma but no additional bitterness, right? So I think that Citra Chinook nose on it's definitely lovely. Comes in right around, I hope it's the same on the can, 6.3 ABV, 69 IBUs. So again, I mean, in the world of IPAs, that's on a lower scale to a certain degree of maybe what's like considered like a true West Coast IPA. But I think the byproduct of that is something that's extremely drinkable. You definitely get your hop presence in there, but it's not a complete palate wrecker, which I think is kind of nice. I did a beer dinner a couple months ago, and I've kind of realized, like, the story I always tell about IPAs is like the cliche story you always hear, which is IPAs, the historical origin of IPAs is you've got English people brewing beer in England, and you've got English people living in colonies in India, right? So some brewer says, man, this beer isn't showing very well by the time it makes it to India. So we're going to add more alcohol, which is a natural preservative. We're going to add more hops on top of it to kind of balance it all out. Hops also can act as a preservative. And the end product, by the time it leaves England and gets to India, is this slightly higher alcohol, slightly hoppier beer, which the troops, mainly living in India, are going to fall in love with, right? Has everybody heard that story to some degree, or does that ring a bell? And I think that's kind of true, but it's probably, I don't know, I think it's kind of time to, like, scale that back a smidge, because that's a pretty dumbed down version of it to a certain degree. I think most beer historians now, and it's still like you can Google it and you can find 50 different answers, but it's not quite as simple as that, really. There's, essentially, the troops that are living in India are drinking porter because that's the beer of the people, right? And that beer, for all intents and purposes, is showing up in India, tasting fine enough for the troops. They're not putting up much of a fuss. It's the rich people in India, the rich English people in India, who are tasting their beer and saying, this isn't quite tasting the way that the expensive beer I've been drinking in England tasted. What's going on here? And so there's a particular brewer that starts to have the notion that he's going to send over what was historically called an October beer. And it was like the early origins of a barley wine, right? Another beer of the aristocracy, a really expensive to make beer, expensive meaning more ingredients meaning more alcohol, and also meaning probably a little bit more hop profile on it. And he says, you know what, I bet that beer would do pretty well on a little bit of a voyage, and these rich English people in India would probably like it. And so I think most people now think that that's the origin of the IPA. By the time that beer made it to India, went through the East India Trading Company and things of that nature, the beer started to grow the moniker of an India Pale Ale. And from there, people started to essentially just make a beer that tasted that way. They used that as a base example and started to do that. So anyways, I think it's easy just to throw out that easy, they took a pale ale and they put more alcohol and more hops into it, and then voila, it worked. And I think all things considered, historians seem to disagree with that dumbed down generalization. History. What else do I got on this one? It's fun beer. I think you see a lot of, if you're on the face space, every day you see some random ranking of breweries or beers brought to you by who knows whom. I think I see that a lot. Paste Magazine, which I think is a pretty legit online food and beverage resource, did a blind tasting of 116 IPAs, and the beer you're having here came in ranked at number 14, believe it or not, which I think we were pretty stoked about. I thought that was pretty nice. And there's heavy hitters up in that 1 through 15 category. Cigar City High Lie, Stone IPA, you might have heard of. That's a pretty okay one. Founder, Centennial, so some of the great American IPAs. So I think it shows that, we're on the right track with this beer. I think it's built to be exactly what we want it to be, which is drinkable, delightful IPA, which I have not had a sip of yet. Yeah.
I'll add to that. I was going to mention this anyway, but when you have one of those blind taste tests, 114 IPAs, and you think about you doing it, like, this is probably a bunch of BS, really. I mean, really 114 IPAs, you pick one? But
Oh yeah, good luck.
the point is that when you see somebody that's a highly ranked, whatever it is, in one poll or whatever, I mean, who really cares? But this particular beer, and I look at this stuff every day because I want to know what you guys are going to buy. So I'm looking at polls, all the time about beer, deciding whether I'm going to put it on draft or whether I'm going to get it or not. And this beer is consistently like in the top 20 on every list. So it's a really great IPA. And no matter what you're looking at, if you're looking at Beer Advocate or Rate Beer, you're looking at Taste Magazine, you're looking at all these other blind tastings, this beer is always the top 8 to 10%. So
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So I think it's well made.
everybody else thinks it's a good beer.
I'll note too, I don't know if, I've become, my beer snobbery has shifted a lot in my 6 or 7 years in the beer business. And my beer snobbery is now primarily on date codes, which is kind of, you look at the best buy date on beer or when the beer was brewed, right? And I think no more important is that a good thing to take a look at than IPAs, right? Because the fresher your IPA, no matter how well it's made and how reputable it is, the fresher of your IPA 9 times out of 10 is going to be your best IPA. The second an IPA leaves its home, leaves its brewery, it is degrading quickly. Hop profile, that beautiful citrusy, grapefruity hop aroma in beer starts to degrade like that. And so, yeah, it's a good thing to keep in mind when buying IPAs. I say that, I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
Is there any particular brewery that you trust more with their IPA further out or the quality stuff?
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it. I mean, I think I'll say ours is built to withstand the date code in which we put on it in a very wonderful way. Plus some. I think we're conservative on our date coding. No, I think there's lots of breweries that are. I think it's also easy to think about which breweries IPAs are proven sellers that are moving the most. And I think 9 times out of 10, then you're also going to find that beer to be pretty darn fresh. And I think Stone's obviously led the way and done a great job by really making date coding with their Enjoy By series and things like that to be a prominent feature. And I think that's good. I think it's time that that's the next evolution in education on beer. Despite it's a scary thing as a brewery or a distributor in the sense that you don't want beer sitting on shelves and things like that. But I think that is the next evolution, is people really focusing in on freshness on beer, which is good. That's the way it should be.
Keep in mind in this conversation that it doesn't mean the beer is not going to taste good if it's backdate or if it's whatever. It just means it's going to taste different. It's probably not going to be IPA.
Thank you.
Left the brewery, right?
Appreciate it.
So maybe IPAs that are sort of, super malty, like I've got a Hopsland in my cooler downstairs and I'm saving for a rainy day.
Oh, drink it.
It'll be a really great beer.
Yeah.
It's just not going to be what it was when it left the brewery. That's a good example of one that I think will be really good because it's a really malty, big IPA. But so they're still going to be good. You might love them. They're just not exactly what the brewer intended when it left the brewery.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, we started getting into obviously subjectivity in a pretty serious way in the entire discussion tonight. But yeah, you could have an entire beer school about the theories of aging beer. If anybody's got a big cellar of beer in their basement, there's different concepts. I have ceased cellaring anything but sour beers, for example. I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. I want my bourbon barrel beer tasting boozy and hot. I want my IPAs tasting fresh. And I want my sour beer getting funkier in the basement. That's my mentality. So you could have a whole beer school on that for sure, which we will not do tonight. Number 4. Bring me back. Okay, so we're on to... Oh, my 4th time doing a beer school. I'm sorry. That's what I said. I'll come back and do a cellar thing. We're on to beer number 3. The next class I might be there. I'm not there yet. Don't worry about it. You guys get the...
That's a good graduate class.
You get the... Cellar beer would be a really fun one. I dig that. Yeah. Next week. I'll see you. No, yeah. I'll bring all the beer from my cellar and drink it up here on stage. That'll be entertaining, yeah. Yeah, that is a fun idea for a class. No, we are on beer number 3. You're right, you guys are good. So this next beer is Hopcentric. Hopcentric. It doesn't roll off the tongue in my mind's eye necessarily. It's like Hopcentric. This beer, forever and ever since the inception of the brewery, was called Hop Juice, which is a little more fun and playful. We have, I don't know if you can see, there's like some pliers squeezing out juice from a hop. Over the time, we never trademarked that, and over time, there was like 30 other breweries that made a hop juice, and at some point, it just got a little muddy, that name of beer. So about 2 years ago, we've changed it to Hopcentric, because it is hop-centric. So that just made life a little bit easier with the lawyers and good to go. So this is Hopcentric. And this is a once-a-year release from us. Every June, we release this beer at a festival at the brewery, which has turned into a pretty big little shindig. For a little while, it was our essentially like line out the door, people coming in to get a limited amount of 22-ounce bombers of this beer. Look out. Is anybody driving a car with a car alarm? You might want to check the parking lot. Yeah, all right. Whew. All right, good deal. So we brew it once a year. It's a very limited batch. Missouri only got really a handful of small kegs of it and not a large amount of cases. So you guys are, getting really, for us, is one of our more limited beers. It's definitely a big malt bomb so far as double IPAs go, and I think that to a certain degree, that speaks to the brewery. I mean, we started brewing this beer in the early 2000s. You think about how palates looked in the early 2000s. This beer was mind-blowing in the early 2000s. I mean, like, it's delicious and mind-blowing now, but this beer would, like, take the enamel off your teeth in the early 2000s. I think now, I can think of many double IPAs that, are just different. I think much more, again, maybe hops fully on display, whereas I think for us, Hopcentric is definitely, big malt profile on the back burner, almost enough so leading you into barley wine territory. There's a lot of residual sugar. It's a little over 9% alcohol. I think we throw some ridiculous number, 100.1 IBUs, which I don't think our equipment is quite calibrated to determine, but I think we're pretty close to it. So it's definitely a huge hop profile on there, and obviously again, like, it's always that yin and yang of beer, right? Malty sweetness, hoppy bitterness, and you're gonna tip the scales one way or another. I think in this case we've let the malt scale hang a little bit more so than maybe a traditional double IPA that's being made right now. But I think that's kind of delightful in that way. What do you guys think of this beer? Super fresh right now. Yep.
So what type of food would you pair with this beer?
Oh man, that's like a plant. That was the one fun thing I had. Not the one of the fun things I had to say about this beer. Oh yeah, just have 4 of them and call it a night. No. I think there's really fun pairing opportunities. I think you do. You always come into a little bit of difficulty. Yeah, I mean, cheese across the board. You come into difficulty pairing hoppy beers, I think, in the same way you come into pairing like really tannic red wines or something like that. There's abrasive quality here to begin with, and it's kind of tricky sometimes to find the correct complement or contrast that works well. So my number one go-to pairing for Hopcentric is carrot cake. Not joking, it's the friggin' best thing in the whole wide world. It's mind-blowing. Something about like the cream cheese. So I mean, you get your cheese in it, and you get your vegetables. But no, carrot cake and double IPAs. I mean, try it. It will change. Yeah, it'll change something. I took. So Chad was nice to mention. I took the certified cicerone test early on in the deal, and that's like the beer version of a sommelier, right? So I took it back in Chicago right when it started, and this was something I put on my test. They ask you to pair a beer, you come up with a unique pairing, and this is something I had in my wheelhouse from doing beer dinners and things like that, was double IPAs and carrot cake. Yeah, match made in heaven. So that's a good question. Thank you for asking that. Yep. I will have to now. Yeah, exactly. They added another layer, those jerks. Now I gotta go get back to school. So double IPAs, right? We're gonna finish off our course here with an Imperial Stout. Imperial Stout, Imperial IPA, double IPA, same thing, right? We'll talk about kind of the origins of an Imperial Stout, but the origins of the Imperial IPA is nothing more than America bigger is better. I mean, that's how Imperial IPAs came to be. I mean, we said, like, we're going to take this incredibly flavorful, hoppy, boozy beer, and we're going to double the ingredients so that it's double the fun, And I think that's wonderful, personally. I think it's amazing. There's a guy out in California named Vinny Caruso who owns a brewery called Russian River, who is wildly considered the father of the Imperial IPA. So we owe him, the thanks on that front. And anymore now, I think, double IPA, Imperial IPA, you're looking somewhere between 9 and 10% alcohol. You're definitely looking at 100 plus IBUs, and from there, the malt profile versus the hop astringency versus the amount of booze you get on it is kind of up to the brewer.
Yeah. I'm not going to come up with some amazing, food pairing like
carrot cake.
But I just wanted to say that when you're pairing things, especially with beers like this, it's not about what beer tastes like a lot of times. Like you can't really pair some kind of flavor profile with this, but you can, like that, it's tough to do, but what you can do is you pair the intensity of the beer. So if you're drinking a double IPA, you want to pick food that's also intense. You want to pick something that's, super fatty, or you want to take something that's just a super intense flavor, and it's going to be able to stand up, to this kind of beer. So if you don't know really what to eat, and you have a beer that you want to pair something with, the easy way out, really, instead of trying to compare the actual flavor, is to just look at the intensity of the beer and pick a food that matches that.
That's spot on. That's the good mentality to go on. And for xenophiles out there, it's the same way. You don't pair shrimp with some crazy California Zin that's at 15% alcohol, right? You just don't do that. It's matching intensities is the good base layer way to go. I think since I'm waiting for the rest of the beer to go around, food pairing stuff is fun. Beer owns food pairing versus wine, flat out, just does. And I'm not saying that because it's my business to say it. It is my business to say it, but it does. Beer excels in food pairing versus wine and has since the dawn of the human race. And for a lot of reasons, carbonation being one of them. Thank you very much. But also, it's hard to screw up a beer and food pairing too. It's easy to screw up a wine and food pairing. You can do that pretty darn quick, I think. But beer and food they're kind of just inherently more matched from an agricultural perspective and a lot of other things. So beer, you get aha, like, if you really want to geek out about it, like moments with certain wine and certain food. But beer just works. It just works across the board. Always has. All right, so that was Hopcentric. And now we will wrap up with, this is fun, we'll wrap up with Northwind, which is our Imperial Stout. I'm going to own up to it. You're tasting vintage Northwind, which there's nothing wrong with. We hold on to a little bit of Northwind and see how it holds up. This is the 2014 batch of Northwind. Fresh Northwind will be coming to stores near you in late December. So we wanted to try something different, something we didn't do earlier in the year when I was here. And so this was a fun thing to break out of the archives and let you guys give it a taste. So, Imperial Stout. Has anybody not had an Imperial Stout before? It's totally fine if you haven't. Couple, that's wonderful. So, I'll delve into a little bit more history just briefly on Imperial Stouts. Right, Imperial Stouts have history behind them. We're going to talk similar to that IPA discussion we had. The English are brewing porters at the time, soon to be called stouts in higher gravity, and they're shipping their beer kind of all throughout Europe, and they start shipping their beer to the Balkans, and they get word that Peter the Great over in Russia is digging on this dark beer they're making. They're making the beer a little bit stronger, potentially a little bit more hop profile on it so that it ships a little bit better. But they're also just doing that because they're selling it to rich people, and rich people deserve more ingredients in their beer. That's a thought at the time. That's not a personal statement. You get what I'm saying, historically speaking. So, and so they're making this really bold, powerful stout, something a degree above so far in flavor and alcohol from the porters that your average blue-collar worker was drinking. So Peter the Great starts to love it. And then all of a sudden, 70 years later or whatever, Catherine the Great loves it as well. And so they start shipping just mass quantities of this dark, flavorful, boozy liquid to the Russian court. And hence the name Russian Imperial or Imperial Stout is born. So that's really the rough historical overtones on it. In researching that history, a couple of years ago, I came across another interesting fact. Catherine the Great was known to be a bit of a philanderer. There's rumors of how she died. Has anybody ever heard the rumor? Go for it.
A horse.
A horse. not falling off of a horse, which might be the actual answer. Copulation with a horse. That's the rumor. I'm not saying I made it up. I'm just saying that is the rumor that people at the time said she was having sex with a horse. It's pretty crazy. Later came out that she probably fell off of a horse, but apparently she had quite an appetite. So I digress. Sorry. Let's see here. What else do I have? Yeah. Okay. I'm back to it. Back to it now. So our Imperial Stout. I had to see if you were paying attention back there. Yeah. Thank you. So our Imperial Stout sits also, maybe on the for modern day Imperial Stout numbers, sits maybe a little lower, and that's once again maybe the byproduct of it being created 15 years ago. It's Imperial Stouts now range up to, you name it, right? 16% alcohol. You want to throw in some barrel aging and residual booze, and you get up there. This for us, I think, is a good old-fashioned classic American Russian Imperial Stout. Sits right around 9% alcohol, 45 IBUs. It's definitely well hopped. It has to be to stand up to the amount of malt profile that's in the beer. But yeah, it really, I think, lets that astringent, roasty malt profile shine through. And I think astringent is really what you're looking at, right? When you brew a beer using grains that have been roasted to the point of blackening them like they are on the top there, if anybody can see that. It's the same way of thinking about coffee, right? You're thinking about light roast coffee and dark roast coffee, and the darker roast your coffee goes, the more astringent it becomes, all things considered. So I think that's the nice part about this beer, is it's generously hopped, but it lets, again, that yin and yang lets the malt kind of shine. I think it lets that roasty, toasty, really nice malt profile shine on it, which is what I like a lot about this beer.